All right, first one. Let me just say a word about this before we get into it. When people spend time arguing with one another, if they bother to do that, about things that are strategic, what do they talk about? They talk about Russia and China, right? The answer is yes, Russia and China. They're the new headaches, or the old headaches, or whatever. And what do we worry about when we say nuclear? Oh, well, they might get something in the next 5 to 10 years. Why 5 to 10 years? Because that's about the length of time our minds can go out, more often than not, when it comes to threats, particularly if we're trying to argue that we need or do not need something, like a nuclear missile or whatever. So if you look out 5 to 10 years, and you think about what the Russians or Chinese would get, it's a debate about hundreds at most. They might get several hundred of X. What are we gonna do? Right. This is a problem potentially that's measured not 5 to 10 years, but 10 to 20 years. And we can track it even better than the military stuff because it's done in the open. You don't have to spy, counter spy. Just go over there, they'll show you this stuff. More important, what's in potentia here is a ramp up, let's say in the case of China, that would be measured not in hundreds or even thousands, but in the next 10 to 20 years, 10 to 20,000 bombs worth of material being on the ready that could be turned into weapons with a decision to do so in anything from 12 to 48 months, depending on what parameter. But quickly, that's a big number. Does anybody know how many bombs worth of material we have? And the answer is a lot. Now this is unclassified, which means it's probably wrong. And if you get the classified brief, it's probably wrong too. But roughly, you get an idea here. This is from a friend of mine's site, the International Camel Fissile Materials. And it's free. You can go type that in. You're there. And this is, I think, the latest set of charts. But what these charts tell you is that the amount of weapons, separated plutonium, and the amount of highly enriched uranium, which is directly, these materials are directly usable to make bombs, are measured roughly, in the case of Russia and the United States, in the tens of thousands of bombs worth. Some of it is civilian, some of it is in weapons, some of it is disabled weapons, some of it is stockpile, some of it is naval material, but there it is. And you'll notice what's interesting is that countries like China have very small amounts of these materials compared to us. But the countries have various amounts, and then Japan's got an interesting case. They have a lot of civilian plutonium, mostly in Europe. It's not an inconsiderable amount in Japan. And the reason that's sort of interesting is when you get this book, okay, how many, you do not have to have this book, but whoever has the book, if you open it up and share with your neighbor, there is, well, I guess, come to think of it, here I was going to show you a graphic that doesn't exist. It's not in the book, so that was a false alarm. Essentially, in 50 years ago, half century ago, the amounts of material that would separate plutonium and highly enriched uranium from the stockpile was a simple number in the world. Do you know what it was? By the way, your job is to make mistakes. Please guess. Say again?
What year was it?
50 years ago. You know, like 1960, I don't know. No, more than 50. We'll say 62.
Henry, it's on 52, 53.
Say again?
I think, is this what you were looking for, 52, 53?
No.
Updated chart.
No, that's the chart that's up there. Take a guess.
Oh, highly enriched, you said?
Highly enriched uranium and plutonium, about 50 or 60 years ago. How much was hanging around?
Is there zero?
Thank you. By the way, all political numbers that matter, they're to infinity and zero. Everything else is for political scientists. Okay? So zero. That you can get your head around that. That isn't the case now. So some of this stuff could be used to ramp up. But it isn't just that there's material hanging around that Russia and the United States get remilitarized, or maybe Japan, and that to a lesser extent these other countries would. It's that the means to make this stuff is also, there are plans to make it spread. Now, in the case of Japan, I mentioned that they have a stockpile of like 47 tons. Most of that's sitting in Europe, but they have about 10 or 11 tons sitting in Japan. Now, 10 or 11 tons, to give you some idea, it takes, I would say, let's go conservative, 5 kilograms of material, and there's 1,000 kilograms in a ton, right? Well, there is. So 10 tons, so how many bombs in a ton? 5 into 1,000 is what?
200.
200, thank you. So 10 tons would be
2,000.
2,000. Now, how many weapons does the United States have deployed?
Couple thousand?
About 2,000. Wow. Okay, so they have that in the waiting. But what if I was to tell you that this plant, which is supposed to open in 2021, will make 8 tons per year? How much is 8 tons? Divide 8,000 by 5, what do we get? You want me to do it, I'm going to do it.
Well, they're hesitating because you gotta do different math.
1,600.
Well, no, come on now. Are you
1,600.
just writing, or are you doing long division?
Just writing.
Well, will you please do the long division?
Oh,
Anybody got
I
a
am
phone?
rusty
We're
on my
waiting.
long division. 1,600.
Thank you.
But it's not 5 kilo for each unit.
What's that?
What each
No,
unit?
I'm talking about plutonium for the moment.
Okay,
And that's,
I thought you were pointing to Rikasha.
yeah, well, there are 2 Rikasha plants, and yes, we need 2 graphics, and it's hard for you to know.
Okay.
We'll talk about the uranium in a minute. The health, God, wrong graphic.
That's why Josh was puzzled.
Yeah.
Plus, I haven't done long division since I was like 12. So.
That's why you come here. They do long division. All right, so 1,600. That's roughly how many weapons we have deployed a year. That's a big number, and it's going up. All right, if they open. Meanwhile, the Chinese are talking about buying a copy of that plant. You know, I'm just kind of astonished that they didn't catch that. There's the uranium plant. Huh. Oh, well, doesn't matter. They all kind of look big. Imagine a big plant. It's already built. You just have to turn it on. In the case of the Chinese, they don't really have a big plant, but they want to buy a copy from the French of this, roughly the same plant with the same capacity that the Japanese have. Now, they claim, both the Japanese and Russians, excuse me, Japanese and Chinese, that they were doing this for civil purposes. There's only one problem. It makes no economic sense. None. You would, however uneconomic nuclear power is, it doesn't get cheaper by using plutonium-based fuels. It gets more expensive. So it's a weird thing to do. Then they say it's for waste management. Well, also makes no sense compared to just taking the spent fuel and putting it in a dry concrete cask. It's a lot cheaper. So this is something which does make sense, however, if you want to have a breakout capability. In the case of the Chinese, they originally wanted to buy the French machine and run it starting probably in the late 20s, and then have maybe, 15,000 bombs worth of separated plutonium put in a fast breeder reactor. Now, it's interesting, I gave this brief repeatedly many years ago to the French government, apparently a registry. They never can get done with their negotiations to get this plant built. And the Chinese have finally given up trying to buy this French plant. They're going to make a smaller one. It's not that much smaller. Instead of 8 tons, it would be more like 2 tons. So we watch that. And then finally, the ROK wants to pyro reprocess, which is just a fancy word for a kind of separation of plutonium. And they want to do that in 2021, and they were waiting for us to say that's fine. We'll see how that works, because they want to use U.S. origin spent fuel. Now, in the case of enrichment, these surpluses of capacity could be used, beyond supplying the needs of civil nuclear energy. The capacity in China that's planned originally was so much more than the civil power plants needed that they were going to basically have a surplus of 4.5 million. They call them SWUs, separate work units. It's a fancy metric. But that roughly converts into, something like 1,000 or 2,000 bombs worth of highly enriched uranium in excess of civil requirements. Japan also, now we can go back and take a look at the graphic, I guess. This plant here can produce, up to 6,400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium a year. That's more than 500 bombs a year. Now, nobody is saying they're going to do this, but these things need watching, because neither China nor Japan need these plants. You can buy enriched uranium for dirt cheap on the international market. It's actually at an all-time low. And that's not going to change. The capacity is far in excess of the demand. Will be for probably at least another decade or so. So these are curious things. Then there's this thing called tritium. Now, if you want to make a boosted weapon, or a thermonuclear weapon, you need tritium. Well, in the case of North Korea, they have the reactors to irradiate lithium-6. They have the extraction plant here, and they have the lithium-6 production plant. Something tells me they might be, making all of this. Not to be outdone, the South Koreans have a plan to take tritium out of heavy water, because they have 4 heavy water plants. Now, you do this for decent reasons. It's occupational hazard safety, because tritium is radioactive. You don't want the health to get hurt. But what's interesting is at any given time, there are 4 kilograms of tritium that's fresh. It decays, I think, 12.3 years. Half of it goes away. That's called the half-life. That plant, 4 kilograms, that's enough to boost 1,000 weapons. Now, if it was just me saying this, Of course, it would be terribly important, you'd all be very impressed. But what's much more interesting is they talk about it. But you gotta read it in Korean. And luckily, I had somebody working for me who read Korean that brought my attention. They don't generally write all this stuff that they got in English in the press, but a lot is said in Korean. Japan, of course, would never be able to make nuclear weapons, much less boosters and nuclear weapons, but it is interesting to know how many institutes of fusion. As in, of course they can. Look at this. All right, now, again, what I'm trying to get at is those kinds of capabilities. I think I could have had some slides on India, but I didn't. And maybe soon, Pakistan. They're all building additional capability to produce fissile material and tritium. And that could get tapped. Now the argument is, oh, well, but it hasn't happened yet. Yeah, well, maybe arguably, depending on how you interpret the history of the British, French, Indian, every other part, they were sort of related to the civil sector. They exploited research reactors at a minimum, or in the case of the British and the Russians and the Americans, machines that produced electricity and bombs. But I think the bigger point is, even if you allow that, the past is not a great predictor of the future. Anybody here lose money on the stock market? Oh, you should try it. Understand what capitalism is about. It's called gambling. Yeah. Well, same thing with this. It seems to me that as everyone becomes a member of a treaty that says they won't get nuclear weapons, it assumes in the future that no one will cheat. Does anybody think, as a principle of international law and practice in history, that that's a sound proposition? You're shaking your head. That's good, it's reassuring. I mean, if you said no, yes, I'd be worried. So someone might cheat, and if they did, they'd use these facilities. It would be a little bit like imagining Hitler, Stalin having nuclear reactors, and the war breaks out in 1939, and someone says, oh, well, you can't use a civil reactor to make nuclear material, it's just not done. And they would go, oh, okay, well, we'll do a dedicated military program. No, they would go immediately to what was quickest. Heads up. So that's the first problem.